It's a distinct honor to welcome the 10th Annual American Glaucoma Society Clinician Scientist Lecturer, Joe Caprioli. I first wanted to go over what really is the purpose of this award. And the AGS Clinician Scientist Lectureship is given annually by a person who exemplifies qualities of excellence in patient care and basic research. And as you can see, there's a list of 10 individuals, including Joe, who have received this distinct honor. And so how does one go about becoming an outstanding clinician scientist? Well, this is a picture of Joe's parents, Peter and Mary, in New Jersey. And he is actually the youngest son, and there are 4 boys in that family. And so here is Joe, the young one, right there, with his older brother, Peter. And here he is with his older brother, Robert. And they don't just hang out in New Jersey. Actually, Joe did go on and get a BS at the State University of New York of Stony Brook. He then went and got his medical degree at the State University of New York at Buffalo. He did general surgery at Yale, and then saw the light and switched to ophthalmology at Yale. He then went on to do a glaucoma fellowship with George Spaeth at the Wills Eye Hospital. And this is a photograph showing Joe when he graduated from medical school. He then developed several research interests. I don't have them all listed here, but a lot of you don't realize that some of his first work was done on forskolin and its effects on intraocular pressure. He's provided information to the field on visual functioning, optic nerve head and retinal nerve fiber layer physiology, anatomy and imaging, glaucoma surgery, neural networks, nitric oxide, heat shock protein, and the list could go on, but we do have time limits. He's had 235 publications, published 5 books, 3 R01s, 119 lectures, and he has 70 clinical or research fellows throughout the world. This resulted in an individual becoming a Francis and Ray Stark Professor of Ophthalmology and Professor at UCLA. In addition, he then became the David May II Professor of Ophthalmology in 2003 to present, and so currently he is the David May Professor at UCLA. He was the Chief of Glaucoma at Yale in 1984 to 1997, and then he came to UCLA where he became the Chief of Glaucoma and is actually my division chief. And it is a real honor to have Joe as our division chief because he's provided outstanding leadership and support to our division. And I feel very fortunate that I have such a talented and hardworking colleague who has become over the years a good friend. I've been working with Joe for over 12 years, and I recently found out that he's actually a biostatistician at heart, which a lot of us might not have known. We always think of him as a great surgeon and clinician and researcher and scientist, but at a recent wine tasting with a room full of biostatisticians that my husband and I hosted, the biostatisticians were all describing the Barbera wines that Joe had recommended us to use in kind of qualitative terms. You know, it had a raspberry taste, maybe citrusy. Well, Joe came in and he said, well, he gave that wine an 80 based on his ranking scale of 0 to 100. Well, at the end of the evening, everybody was using Joe's ranking scale. And so I couldn't decide whether it was because of Joe's influence on all of these biostatisticians that they'd found one of their own, or was it because of the wine? Well, when I got this photograph from Angela, his wife, I decided it was Joe's influence. Because here you see all these young glaucoma specialists with cigars. But then, once again, this might be confounded also by wine. I didn't find that out. I really wanted to point out something that a lot of you might not realize, but that Joe is not only someone who has really made outstanding contributions to our field in glaucoma and is an outstanding clinician scientist, but he's also a family man. And here you can see his beautiful and very talented wife, Angela, who I also consider a friend, and his children. So Joe, it is really truly an honor to have you present the AGS Clinician Scientist Lectureship.
I thought I'd start with this quote. Everything is vague to a degree you don't realize till you have tried to make it precise. And I've really realized that in this work that I'm about to share with you this afternoon. That was by Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher and writer. So we're going to talk about this afternoon the importance of rates in glaucoma. Over the last day or two, I've spent a lot of time taking slides out of the presentation because it was just too long. But I realize that there are a lot of people who have contributed to this area, a lot of people in the room have contributed to this area, and I apologize if I don't get to mention everyone. Also, yesterday I gave a short talk on event analysis and trend analysis in measuring progression in glaucoma. And you might see a few of the same slides in here, and I've decided to sacrifice a little bit of redundancy for the sake of keeping this story whole. So with those apologies, let's proceed. I think you've seen this graph in some form or another. And what we have here is birth and death and some measure on the y-axis of visual function. And we have glaucoma patients who are progressing slowly. And here we have glaucoma patients who are progressing more quickly. And we have some level here of visual disability, some threshold, and that's different for different patients, of course, but some threshold of visual disability. The fast progressors, well, obviously will get there quicker. And those who receive early intervention, if it's effective, may avert this visual threshold, whereas if it's applied too late, they may not. So it may be that it's more important to know the rate of progression, even though in recent years we've been attributing a lot of work to sort of early detection. It may be more important to know the rate of progression. To direct treatment to the right patients at the right time, to avoid what I would consider an artificial dichotomy of stable or worse. It really is that everyone is getting worse, but at different rates. We have to realize also that the functional and structural scales, at least from the clinical point of view, are not synchronous or linear. This was some old work of mine. This was a rather crude attempt to look at the relative rates of change of disc to field with the progression of glaucoma, with the stage of glaucoma. And early in the disease, the rate of change of disc to field is much greater than it is later in the disease. So it may be a factor of 1 or 2 orders of magnitude. So certainly these scales are not synchronous or linear. Let's look at rate detection with respect to structure. Certainly we can have qualitative rate estimates. And we can use sequential stereodisc photographs for this, and we can grade the rate of progression as slow, moderate, or fast. For instance, here's a patient at baseline and 8 years later, and you can see the change here in the superior temporal rim of the disc, and we could call this slow progression, for instance. Here we see baseline and 4 years later. The patient had a disc hemorrhage that resolved into a thinned disc rim superior-temporally. And you might want to call this moderate rate of progression. And here we have an interesting patient who progressed rather quickly. Look at the inferior rim there and the new notch that's developed, along with this dense, punched-out paracentral scotoma. This was a patient with normal pressure glaucoma only 1 year later, a rather fast rate of progression. Young Kwan has actually quantified the cup-disc ratio in patients followed over a long period of time, and he showed examples in his paper of 2003 of a slow rate of progression, a moderate rate of progression, and a fast rate of progression with respect to